Hello, and welcome to the Reykjavik Newsdesk. I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine, and these are the week's top stories in Iceland. If you like the content that you see here, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you really like the content that you see here, check out the Patreon link in the description below. But now, the week's top stories. So if you've been online at all this week, you've probably noticed that Iceland got in the news again. And not because of a volcano or Eurovision, but because Elon Musk chose to get into a very public spat with Haraldur Þorleifsson, who is a designer and entrepreneur whose company had been acquired by Twitter some years ago. This all started on March 6th when Haraldur tweeted that he had been locked out of his work computer about 9 days ago. He said that HR was not able to confirm if he still worked for Twitter, and Elon was not answering his emails, and so he was taking to Twitter instead to try to get an answer as to whether or not he was still employed by Twitter. After thousands of retweets, Elon at last did respond, asking Haraldur to describe the work that he had been doing at Twitter. Haraldur obliged, describing the work that he had been doing at Twitter, but Elon didn't take this very well. He disparaged Haraldur's work, saying that he hadn't been doing any work, and implied that he was lying about his disability. For the record, Haraldur has muscular dystrophy. These tweets from Elon raised a lot of eyebrows because they may have violated two American laws. In particular, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act might have been broken by Elon discussing Haraldur's medical condition to the public at large, and the American Disabilities Act because of the implication that he had fired Haraldur for being disabled. Elon got a lot of pushback for this, even from some of his biggest supporters, and ultimately he said he had a video call with Haraldur to try to clarify the situation, saying that it's always better to communicate directly rather than through Twitter. Which raises the question of why he didn't do that to begin with, to have this conversation through email from the very start. In any event, Elon backtracked and apologized for his behavior, at least in a tweet, and said that Haraldur is now considering whether or not he's going to continue working at Twitter. Following Elon's disparaging remarks, Haraldur made an amazing thread wherein he detailed exactly what this medical condition had done to his body and what his life is like. I've linked to the thread in the description below. You've got to read it for yourself. It is one of the most amazing takedowns I've ever seen on Twitter. So that's a basic summary of what happened in case you weren't already familiar. But I wanted to give you a little bit of my perspective as someone who knows Haraldur, or Halli, both professionally and personally. I had the pleasure of interviewing Haraldur last year for the magazine that I used to work at. A lot of people have brought up that despite being a very rich man, he pays his taxes in Iceland, something that absolutely should not be news at all. When I brought this up to him in the interview, his reply was, "This is probably news because we just expect that after a certain point, people are just not going to pay their taxes." He has gone on the record as saying that the reason why he chose to do this is because the care that he is getting in Iceland would not be possible were it not for taxes. Now, this spirit of wanting to give back to the community is a big part of Halli's raison d'etre, okay? This is a common red thread in everything that he has done with his money ever since becoming wealthy. For example, he started an initiative called Ramp Up Iceland, wherein he has started installing access ramps, thousands of them, across Reykjavik and around the country, which is a matter close to his heart. But he's also stuck out his neck in other areas. For example, a couple years ago, a survivor of sexual assault came forward to talk about her experience. In the wake of this, her attacker threatened her with legal action because he had made her sign an NDA, right? So she was looking at having to go to court and face all kinds of legal fees and having to relive everything in a public court. Well, Halli stepped forward and said that if anyone is facing legal action because they signed NDAs and have decided to talk about the abuse that they've experienced, to contact him. And while he couldn't promise anything, that he would try to help cover their legal costs. He has covered the legal costs of a few of these people so far. Halli is also opening up a nice little restaurant downtown that he's named after his mom, and he's not very far off from opening an artist residency here in Iceland. So this is basically Halli in a nutshell. He's just a regular guy who came from a working class background and through serendipity found himself quite wealthy, and has decided to use that money to give back to his community repeatedly. So this is why, when this story broke, a lot of Icelanders were shocked and horrified that Elon Musk was picking on this man who has won Person of the Year awards across multiple media outlets and is generally regarded as like an objectively good human being. And we certainly need more of those in these times. Moving on to other news. Vísir reports that the Icelandic Opera has been accused of yellowface. This was first brought up by Laura Liu, who is a violinist for the Icelandic Symphony Orchestra, criticizing the Icelandic Opera's production of Madame Butterfly. And this production features a mostly white cast who, in hair and makeup, are made to look Asian. And despite the story of Madame Butterfly being Japanese, the backdrop of the set features Chinese characters. Michelle Gikema, the director and set designer for the production, has denied any and all accusations of racism or yellowface in this production. In the wake of this, Daniel Rowe, who is a Korean-American comedian living in Iceland, wrote an open letter to the Icelandic Opera that I will link in the description below. The basic thrust of the argument, though, is that we all make mistakes, and there's basically two ways you can go. You can either own up to those mistakes and do better, or you can dig in your heels and refuse to change. And that's what the Icelandic Opera has chosen to do so far, but there is going to be a protest in front of Harpa Concert Hall on Saturday against this production. And finally, some good news, as Vísir reports that management and the labor union Efling have come to an agreement. They've both agreed to the collective bargaining agreement submitted by the state arbiter to both parties last week. This is going to mean kroner amount pay rises to Efling workers as well as percentage pay rises. What I thought was really interesting, though, was that this agreement also creates a new job title, which is general guesthouse worker. I had no idea this wasn't already a job title, but now it is, and they're getting a pay rise. So great for them. And it's probably also good news for those of you who were planning to come to Iceland after March 8th and stay in a hotel or guest house and were worried about how the strike would affect you. Well, you can breathe a sigh of relief now. You're safe. For now. In any event, that's the week's news in Iceland. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the content that you see here, be sure and like and subscribe. And if you really like the content that you see here, check out the Patreon link in the description below. On that note, I want to thank Corinne Vasquez and Marion Ward for subscribing at the $20 level. I also want to thank Stephen Ellis and Vivi Carvalho-Schapner for subscribing on the $10 level. You folks rock. In any event, that's all for me. Have a great weekend. Be good to each other.